It was a cold autumn night in Austin, Texas, when Raymond Carter's life changed forever. The streets were quiet except for the occasional passing car, and the sky was dark without a single star in sight. Inside a small suburban home, Raymond sat on the couch, his hands still shaking from the adrenaline rushing through his veins. Blood was splattered across his shirt, and his breathing was heavy. On the floor in front of him, a man lay still, unmoving, dead. His wife, Emily, stood in the corner, her body trembling. Tears ran down her face as she gripped her arms, trying to hold herself together. "Raymond," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "what have you done?" Raymond's eyes darted between her and the lifeless body on the floor. "I did what I had to do," he said, his voice firm but low. Just moments ago, their quiet home had been invaded. A masked man had burst through the door, a gun in his hand, demanding money and threatening Emily's life. Raymond had reacted without thinking. He grabbed the closest thing he could find, a kitchen knife, and fought. In the struggle, the intruder had ended up dead. Raymond knew what this meant. A black man killing someone in self-defense didn't always get justice. He could already hear the sirens in the distance, getting louder. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, but the law didn't always work fairly. Emily ran to him, grabbing his hands. "Raymond, what do we do?" He looked at her, his wife, the woman he had loved for 10 years. "I'll take the blame," he said. Her eyes widened. "What?" "No, there's no time, Emily." He cupped her face gently. "If we both say I did this, maybe I can get a deal. If you say you did it, they won't believe you." Tears streamed down her face. "But you'll go to prison." Raymond nodded slowly. "It's the only way to protect you." The police arrived minutes later. Raymond was arrested on the spot. His fingerprints were on the knife, his shirt was covered in blood, and Emily, still in shock, could barely speak. The story twisted. The police report painted a different picture. A violent man killing in anger rather than in self-defense. Despite everything, Raymond refused to let Emily suffer. He confessed. His lawyer fought for a lighter sentence, but the prosecution argued that the killing was excessive force. 15 years. 15 years behind bars for saving the woman he loved. As he was led away in handcuffs, Raymond looked at Emily one last time. "Wait for me," he told her, and she promised she would. 15 years later, the prison gates opened and Raymond Carter stepped out. The world had changed. He had changed. His once athletic frame had thinned, his hair had hints of gray, and the fire in his eyes had dimmed. But he was finally free. There was only one thing on his mind: Emily. He had written to her for years, but her letters stopped coming 5 years ago. Maybe she had moved. Maybe she had lost hope. But Raymond hadn't. He still loved her. With nowhere else to go, he went to the place he knew best, their old home. But when he arrived, the house was different. The color had changed. A new car sat in the driveway, and when he knocked on the door, the person who answered was not Emily. It was David, his best friend, the man who had testified in court for him, the man who had said he'd look after Emily while Raymond was gone. David's face went pale. "Raymond," he said, his voice uneasy. And then from inside, a familiar voice called out, "Who is it, honey?" Emily stepped into view, and when her eyes met Raymond's, everything froze. His wife, his best friend, together, married. Everything inside Raymond shattered. He had given up 15 years of his life for Emily. He had trusted David. And now the two people he had loved most had betrayed him. He felt rage boiling inside him. But Raymond wasn't a killer. He had already lost too much. Without a word, he turned and walked away. But someone was watching. Detective Olivia Marshall had been following Raymond Carter's case for years. She never believed he deserved prison. And when she saw his face after leaving that house, she knew one thing. Something was very, very wrong. Raymond Carter walked aimlessly down the quiet streets of Austin, Texas, his mind spinning. His heart pounded in his chest, his fists clenched at his sides. He had pictured this day for 15 years, the day he would reunite with Emily, the woman he had sacrificed everything for. But the image in his mind had been a lie. Emily was no longer his. She was married to David, his best friend. His betrayal burned deeper than any wound prison had left on him. Raymond found himself at a small diner on the outskirts of town. He hadn't eaten a decent meal in years, but his stomach felt too sick to handle food. He ordered a black coffee instead and sat in the corner, staring blankly at the steam rising from the cup. He didn't hear her approach until she spoke. "Mind if I sit?" Raymond looked up. A woman in her early 40s, tall, with sharp eyes and dark brown hair tied back in a ponytail, stood beside him. She wore a leather jacket over a button-up shirt, and her expression was unreadable. "Do I know you?" Raymond asked. She slid into the booth across from him. "Detective Olivia Marshall. I used to work homicide, but I followed your case when I was in the DA's office." Raymond narrowed his eyes. "Why?" She tilted her head slightly. "Because it never made sense to me. A man protecting his wife gets 15 years? Something was off. I pushed for a reinvestigation, but the system didn't care." Raymond scoffed. "Yeah, well, the system never cared about guys like me." Olivia nodded. "I get that, but I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here about the present." She leaned forward. "I saw you go to your old house." Raymond's jaw tightened. "You spying on me?" "I was watching. Big difference," she said, taking a sip of her own coffee. "I needed to see how you'd react." Raymond glared at her. "And? You didn't lose your temper. You didn't lash out. Most men in your position would have done something stupid. But you walked away." Raymond exhaled sharply. "What was I supposed to do? Kill them?" She held his gaze. "That's what I'm worried about." Raymond frowned. "I'm not a killer." "I know," Olivia said. "But someone might want you to be." He stared at her, confused. "What the hell does that mean?" Olivia reached into her jacket pocket and slid a folded newspaper across the table. "Read the headline." Raymond picked it up. His grip tightened on the paper. Olivia watched his reaction closely. "Someone's been sending him threats for the last few months. He never reported it, at least not until today." Raymond's stomach twisted. "And you think it's me? If I did, you'd be in handcuffs right now," Olivia said. "But I don't think you had anything to do with it." She leaned in. "I think someone is trying to frame you." Raymond set the paper down and ran a hand over his face. "Why?" "That's what I want to find out," Olivia said. "I need you to be honest with me, Carter. Did you know Emily stopped writing to you 5 years ago?" Raymond's jaw clenched. "Yeah, I figured she moved on." Olivia nodded. "She did, but not the way you think." Raymond frowned. "What do you mean?" Olivia hesitated for a moment before she pulled out her phone and scrolled through something. Then she turned the screen toward him. Raymond's breath caught in his throat. It was a picture of Emily, bruised, a faint cut on her lip, a dark mark on her cheek. The photo was from 3 years ago, taken at a hospital. "She came in for accidental injuries multiple times over the years," Olivia said. "Each time she refused to press charges. No one ever confirmed it was David, but—" She let the words hang in the air. Raymond's fists clenched. "That bastard," Olivia nodded. "I think she was afraid. And now that you're back, someone is making sure you get blamed for whatever happens next." Raymond shook his head. "This doesn't make sense. If he was hurting her, why would she stay? Why would she marry him?" Olivia sighed. "Sometimes people get trapped in bad situations. Sometimes they make choices they regret." She met his eyes. "And sometimes those choices lead to murder." Raymond's blood ran cold. "Murder?" Olivia leaned in. "David Lawson is going to die soon. I don't know how. I don't know when. But I can feel it. And when it happens, the first person they'll come looking for is you." Raymond stared at her, his mind racing. 15 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And now someone wanted to frame him for another one. Raymond sat in silence, gripping the coffee cup so tightly he thought it might shatter. Across from him, Detective Olivia Marshall watched him with an expression that was hard to read. She had just told him that his former best friend, David Lawson, the man who had married his wife while he was in prison, was going to die soon. And when it happened, everyone would suspect him. "Who else knows about these threats?" Raymond finally asked, his voice low. Olivia leaned back against the booth. "Officially, just me. Unofficially, David's been keeping quiet. He only reported it this morning, and even then, he tried to downplay it." Raymond frowned. "Why now?" That's what I've been asking myself, Olivia said. The threats have been coming for months, but he never went to the police. Then the same day you're released from prison, he suddenly decides to report them. It's almost like he's setting the stage for something. Raymond's jaw clenched, like making sure if anything happens to him, I take the fall. Olivia nodded. That's my theory, but I don't deal in theories. I deal in facts. And right now, the facts are pointing in your direction. Raymond let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. I didn't even know Emily was married to him until today. I had no reason to come after him. I believe you, Olivia said. But the justice system isn't about what's true. It's about what can be proven. And right now, David has set up a narrative where you're the angry ex-con with a motive for revenge. Raymond's mind raced. He had spent 15 years in prison, rotting away for a crime he hadn't committed. He had imagined countless ways to rebuild his life once he got out. But now, just hours after his release, he was already a suspect in a crime that hadn't even happened yet. He had to think. He had to stay ahead of this. He had to find out who was really behind the threats. Where is Emily? Raymond asked. Olivia studied him for a moment before answering. At home, I assume. She hasn't been seen much in public lately. Is she safe? His voice was edged with concern. That's the million-dollar question, Olivia admitted. If David really is the one behind the threats, then he's trying to control the situation. If someone else is after him, she might be in danger too. Raymond exhaled sharply. I need to see her. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Bad idea. If you show up at their house, you're only going to look more guilty. Right now, you need to stay as far away from them as possible. Raymond wasn't convinced. If something happens to Emily, I won't let that happen, Olivia said firmly. But you need to trust me. Let me do my job. Raymond gritted his teeth but nodded. Fine. Then what do we do next? Olivia reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small notepad. First, I need you to tell me everything about the night that sent you to prison. The details might help us figure out who's behind all this. Raymond exhaled, forcing himself to go back 15 years. It was a night he had tried to forget. It was a rainy night, he started. Emily and I had just gotten home from dinner. We were supposed to leave town the next morning, start fresh somewhere new. I had a new job lined up, and we were finally going to put all the struggles behind us. Olivia took notes, listening intently. Then the break-in happened, Raymond continued. His voice grew bitter. 2 masked men. They came in through the back door armed. I fought them off, but Emily got hurt in the struggle. I remember one of them calling out a name, Dave, before they ran off. Olivia's pen stopped moving. Wait, you heard one of them say Dave? Raymond nodded. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too focused on Emily. Then before I knew it, the cops arrived. David was the first one on the scene. His hands curled into fists. He pointed them straight at me. Olivia's expression darkened. And he testified against you in court. Raymond let out a harsh laugh. Yeah, said he saw me lose control and attack Emily. Said he tried to stop me, and you never got the chance to prove your innocence, Olivia murmured. Raymond shook his head. I didn't have the resources. And Emily, she was unconscious for days. By the time she woke up, the case was already decided. Olivia tapped her pen against the notepad. So, one of the intruders might have been named Dave, and your best friend David was the one who framed you? Raymond met her gaze. Now you see why I need to talk to Emily. Olivia thought for a moment, then pulled out her phone. I'll find a way to reach her, but we need to be careful. If David really is setting you up, then he's watching every move you make. Raymond nodded. And if someone else is behind the threats? Olivia sighed. Then we're running out of time. The weight of her words settled in the air between them. Raymond had spent 15 years paying for a crime he didn't commit. Now he had a chance to uncover the truth. But with every step forward, the danger grew closer. And someone, whether it was David or another enemy from the past, was making sure Raymond never got the chance to clear his name. Detective Olivia Marshall sat at her desk, staring at the crime reports from 15 years ago. The case against Raymond Carter had always felt too convenient, A man with no criminal record, deeply in love with his wife, suddenly accused of a brutal attack? And the key witness just happened to be his best friend? It didn't sit right. Now David Lawson was claiming someone was threatening his life, and Raymond was the prime suspect. The pieces didn't fit, unless David was setting up Raymond once again. She exhaled sharply and reached for her phone. It was time to speak to Emily. Emily Lawson had aged, but the exhaustion in her eyes made her look older than she should. When Olivia knocked on her door, she hesitated before letting her in. "I know why you're here," Emily said quietly, leading Olivia into the living room. "You want to talk about Raymond?" "Yes," Olivia said, watching her carefully. "And about the threats David has been receiving." Emily let out a bitter laugh. "I wouldn't know much about those. David doesn't tell me anything anymore." Olivia tilted her head. "Anymore?" Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "I should have known something was wrong a long time ago, but I was afraid. I let people tell me what to believe." She looked up, her expression unreadable. "I know Raymond didn't hurt me." Olivia's pulse quickened. "You remember what happened?" Emily nodded slowly. "It came back in pieces over the years. I never told anyone. By the time I fully understood what had happened, it was too late." Olivia leaned forward. "Tell me everything." Emily hesitated, but then she spoke. "That night, Raymond and I were happy. We were leaving town, starting over. But David didn't want that. He showed up at our house, drunk, saying Raymond was making a mistake. They argued, and then I remember the door bursting open. Two men came in. One of them had a gun." She swallowed hard. "I got in the way. I was trying to stop the fight. I remember falling, hitting my head. I heard one of them say, 'Get him out of here before he ruins everything.'" Olivia's hand tightened around her pen. "And the voice? Did it sound like David?" Emily gave her a haunted look. "Yes." A heavy silence filled the room. Emily lowered her head. "I woke up in the hospital, confused. David was by my side, telling me Raymond did it. I believed him. What else could I do? I had no memory of that night. And Raymond, he was already arrested." Olivia took a deep breath. This changed everything. "Emily," she said gently, "David married you while Raymond was in prison. Did he ever mention why he testified against him?" Emily's lips trembled. "At first he said it was for justice. But over the years, I realized it was about control. David never wanted me to leave with Raymond. He wanted me for himself." Olivia's stomach churned. David had framed Raymond not just to send him to prison, but to steal his wife. Olivia left Emily's house with a tight jaw. She had enough reason to suspect David was behind the threats himself, creating a paper trail that would lead to Raymond. But there was still one question left. Who was actually sending the threats? She drove to David's office, a large real estate firm in downtown Houston. He was sitting behind a polished mahogany desk, fake concern plastered across his face. "Detective," he said smoothly, "what brings you here?" "You reported threats against your life," Olivia said, watching his every reaction. "I have some questions." David sighed dramatically. "I don't know who's behind them, but let's be honest. Raymond is an obvious suspect. He's bitter. He lost everything. And now he's back, looking for revenge." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Funny how you waited until the day he got out to report them." David shrugged. "Coincidence?" "I don't believe in coincidences," Olivia said, folding her arms. "Especially not in cases like this." David smirked. "Then I guess you'll have to dig deeper." Olivia leaned in. "Oh, I planned to." She turned to leave but stopped at the door. "One more thing, David. Emily remembers." David's smug expression faltered. For a split second, Olivia saw something flash in his eyes. Fear. She didn't wait for his response. She walked out, already dialing Raymond's number. "It's worse than we thought," she said when he picked up. "David is more dangerous than we realized, and now he knows we're onto him." Raymond's voice was steady. "Then we need to stop him before he does something worse." Olivia nodded to herself. "Agreed. But we have to be smart about it. If we push too hard, he might strike first." They were running out of time. David Lawson had built his life on lies, and now those lies were starting to unravel. Detective Olivia Marshall sat in her car outside David Lawson's office, gripping the steering wheel. The more she dug into the case, the more it became clear that David had orchestrated the perfect crime 15 years ago. He hadn't just framed Raymond. He had stolen his life. Now, with Emily's memories returning and David suddenly playing the victim, Olivia knew he was covering his tracks. But why now? What was he afraid of? Olivia met Raymond at a small diner on the outskirts of Houston. He looked exhausted, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. 15 years in prison had hardened him, but there was still fire in his eyes. "Emily remembers," Olivia said, sitting across from him. Raymond exhaled, sharply. "She told you? She told me everything," Olivia confirmed. "David manipulated her, made sure she believed you hurt her. He didn't just want you gone, Raymond. He wanted her." Raymond let out a bitter laugh. "And he got her, my best friend." He shook his head. "I loved her. I went to prison for her." Olivia leaned in. "And now he's claiming someone is threatening his life. He wants to pin it on you." Raymond's jaw tightened. "So he's setting me up again. Not if we stop him first," Olivia said. "But we need proof, something concrete to tie him to what happened that night." Raymond sat back, deep in thought. "David wasn't working alone. I remember that much. There were other men there." "Emily said the same thing," Olivia said. "Two men broke into the house, but she never saw their faces." Raymond nodded. "Then we find them. If we can track them down, we can prove David planned the whole thing." Olivia pulled out her notepad. "Do you remember anything about them? Any details?" Raymond thought for a moment. "One of them had a deep voice, southern accent. He called David boss. The other guy, he smelled like cigars." Olivia wrote it down. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "I'll dig into David's financials," Olivia said. "If he hired those men, there might be a money trail." Raymond's eyes darkened. "If David sees us getting too close, he'll try to silence us." Olivia nodded. "Then we better move fast." Later that evening, Olivia visited Emily again. This time, Emily seemed more determined, almost as if she had found her strength after years of being trapped in David's web. "I want to help," Emily said. "David thinks he owns me, but he doesn't. Not anymore." Olivia took out her recorder. "I need you to tell me everything, on record. If we're going to take him down, we need a confession." Emily took a deep breath. "David was always controlling, but I didn't see it at first. When I woke up in the hospital, he was already there, feeding me lies about Raymond. He told me over and over that Raymond did it until I believed him. He even had pictures, staged ones, showing me hurt, with Raymond looking angry." Olivia frowned. "Staged? Who took them?" Emily swallowed. "David said they were from the police, but I never saw an officer take them. I think he had someone else do it." Olivia's mind raced. If David staged evidence, then someone helped him. "Emily," Olivia said carefully, "do you think David would kill to protect his secret?" Emily hesitated. "Yes, he's capable of anything." Back at the station, Olivia ran David's financials. After hours of searching, she found something. A payment from David's account, made in cash the night of the attack. It was transferred to a man named Frank Delaney, a known enforcer in Houston's underworld. Olivia pulled up Frank's records: arrests for assault, intimidation, and illegal firearm possession. She grabbed her keys and headed straight for Frank's last known location, a bar on the south side of town. Frank Delaney was exactly what Olivia expected: tough, scarred, and mean-looking. He was nursing a beer when she approached him. "You're Frank Delaney?" she asked, flashing her badge. Frank smirked. "Depends who's asking." "Detective Marshall," Olivia said. "I'm investigating a case from 15 years ago, a break-in that ended with a man wrongfully convicted." Frank tensed slightly. Olivia noticed. "I think you were there that night," she continued. "I think you and another man worked for David Lawson." Frank's smirk disappeared. "Never heard of him." Olivia leaned in. "You sure?" "Because I have a bank transfer from David to you, the night of the crime." She slid a printed copy of the transaction across the table. "You can lie to me, or you can tell me the truth and cut a deal." Frank glanced at the paper, then at Olivia. He sighed. "David paid me and another guy, Carter Briggs, to scare Raymond. Told us to rough him up so he wouldn't leave town with Emily. But it went bad. Real bad." Olivia's heart pounded. "Tell me everything." Frank took a sip of his beer. David got jealous, see? He didn't want Emily leaving him for Raymond, so he planned it, made sure Raymond took the fall. Carter and I were just muscle, but we didn't sign up for what happened next. What happened next? Olivia pressed. Frank hesitated. Emily got hurt. That wasn't the plan. David freaked out, told us to get rid of Raymond, but the cops showed up first. David played the victim, and the rest is history. Olivia stared at him. David had set the whole thing up, using Frank and Carter as his personal enforcers. Where's Carter Briggs now? She asked. Frank chuckled. Dead. David made sure of that. Olivia's blood ran cold. David had killed Carter to cover his tracks. She stood up. I need you to testify. Frank scoffed. Testify against David Lawson? I like breathing, lady. Olivia narrowed her eyes. You either testify or I arrest you as an accomplice. Your choice. Frank cursed under his breath. Fine, but you better keep me alive. Olivia nodded. That's the plan. As she walked out of the bar, she dialed Raymond's number. We got him, she said. David is going down. Raymond was silent for a moment. Then he said, Good. But be careful, Olivia. If David knows we're on to him, he won't go down without a fight. Olivia clenched her jaw. I wouldn't have it any other way. Detective Olivia Marshall knew she was running out of time. David Lawson was dangerous, and if he realized they were closing in on him, someone else might end up dead. Frank Delaney had just confessed that David had orchestrated the attack 15 years ago, framing Raymond and ensuring Carter Briggs, the only other witness, was silenced. That meant one thing. David would do whatever it took to keep the truth buried. Olivia returned to the station and met with her captain, a gruff man named Richard Hayes. This is huge, Hayes muttered, rubbing his temples. We have a statement from Delaney, but without hard evidence, Lawson could spin this however he wants. We need him to confess, Olivia said firmly. And how do you suggest we do that? Olivia took a deep breath. We set a trap. She explained her plan. They would use Frank to bait David into revealing the truth. If David thought Frank was going to betray him, he might slip up. Hayes hesitated. If this goes wrong, we don't have much to stand on. Olivia met his gaze. I'm not letting him get away with this. After a long pause, Hayes nodded. Make it happen. The next evening, Olivia arranged for Frank to call David. They were inside an abandoned warehouse, using a burner phone. The police had set up surveillance. Frank dialed. The call rang twice before David answered. What do you want? David's voice was cold. Frank swallowed. We have a problem, boss. Silence. Then, what did you do? It's not what I did. It's what the cops know. David inhaled sharply. I told you to keep your mouth shut. Frank glanced at Olivia, who nodded for him to keep going. They got me, man. They know everything. And if I go down, you go down with me. David didn't respond right away. Then he said, Where are you? Frank hesitated, pretending to be nervous. The old docks. I can't do this over the phone. David sighed. Fine, I'll meet you there. As soon as the call ended, Olivia turned to her team. Let's get into position. David Lawson arrived an hour later, pulling up in a sleek black SUV. Olivia and her officers stayed hidden, watching. David stepped out, his face calm, but his eyes sharp. He wasn't stupid. He was scanning for danger. Frank approached him, keeping up the act. We're in trouble, man. David scoffed. No, you're in trouble. Olivia saw David's hand move toward his pocket. A gun. She stepped out of the shadows, her weapon drawn. Drop it, David. David froze. Within seconds, officers surrounded him. His expression didn't change. Detective Marshall, he sighed, slowly raising his hands. What's this about? You know exactly what this is about. David smirked. I don't think I do. Olivia stepped closer. 15 years ago, you set up your best friend. You framed him for attacking Emily. You hired 2 men to do your dirty work. One of them is dead, killed on your orders. The other is standing right here, ready to testify. David turned to Frank. You really betrayed me. Frank didn't respond. Olivia continued. We have bank records, David. We have evidence that you paid Frank and Carter Briggs to attack Raymond that night. And we have Emily, who remembers everything. David's face darkened. Then he laughed. You think you've won? His voice was quiet, dangerous. You have nothing. Olivia stepped forward. We have enough to put you away for life. David shook his head. Not if I take you with me. Before anyone could react, he lunged, reaching for his gun. A single gunshot rang out. David collapsed, gripping his stomach. Blood pooled beneath him. Olivia lowered her gun, her hands steady. She walked over as officers secured David's weapon. He was breathing heavily, his cocky smirk finally gone. It's over, she said. David coughed. You ruined everything. Olivia stared down at him. No, David, you did that to yourself. David survived the shooting, but was charged with conspiracy, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice. Raymond was officially exonerated. After 15 years behind bars, he was finally free. Emily, now stronger than ever, filed for divorce and cut David out of her life for good. And Olivia? She stood outside the courthouse, watching as Raymond stepped into the sunlight, a free man. He turned to her. Thank you. Olivia nodded. Go live your life, Raymond. As he walked away, she took a deep breath. Justice had been served, but she knew there would always be another case, another mystery. For now, though, she had won, and that was enough.